what inspired me to play the piano? Well, the first most important thing was that there was a piano in the family home. That was the key to everything. So my grandmother had an upright piano in her front room, which had been a wedding present to her in 1938 from her mother. And that was in my grandmother's front room. And when I was about sort of, I suppose, 6 or 7, which would have been, I suppose, 1965, something like that, I used to go round and my grandmother would show me, it was a pianola, how it would work, and I'd hear all of the old tunes, Red Sails in the Sunset, Ain't Misbehaving, and love these tunes, these piano rolls. And the outside of the case, it was all bomb damaged, where the house had been a bomb dropped at the end of the street. But when you lifted up the lid, it was all sort of perfect wood underneath. So it was quite a mysterious and a magical thing. But the thing that really got me going was my uncle, who was probably a teenager at the time, in his late teens. He played in a rhythm and blues group called the Pianists, which were like a contemporary of the Rolling Stones, but not a success. But he could play boogie-woogie piano. And I heard him playing this one day, and I'd never heard anything like it. And for me, the whole chaos of the universe became ordered. And I sat down and found that I had a gift where I was able to copy what Uncle Dave played, and I could just sort of copy it. And I was just then trying to figure out what he was doing, and then became obsessed with it, which I think is one of the things you need to really to really be good at anything, I suppose, or to really be engaged in something. So I was then obsessed with it and just loved it, and really went on from there. I suppose the most important influence, first of all, was him, and then I realised there was this particular style of piano that I really liked. Now, my parents then said, well, they could see that I had this gift where I could sort of listen to things and play them or copy what he did. So I was sent to piano lessons, but I didn't really get on with them because the music wasn't really music that I enjoyed playing. It was like very simple, the dance of the Pixies or something, and I thought, well, I don't want to. I had no interest in playing it, so I just didn't go. I only wanted to play what I loved, what I could hear. And so I had classical piano records which I'd hear and I'd love, but it was the boogie-woogie and the blues ones. But to me, I'd hear maybe Jerry Lee Lewis or a bit of the Beatles used to have piano in their records, and I couldn't really differentiate between what was jazz or pop. I mean, that didn't, that meant nothing. It was just if it had a piano in it. And in the 60s, it really was the age of the guitar groups. So a lot of the contemporary music, the piano wasn't in the foreground, so I had to sort of go back to the sort of 30s and 40s to really pick up on, and the 50s to pick up on piano music, a lot of which was like this kind of rock and roll that was played on the piano, which was called boogie-woogie. So that was the thing that got me going. But from that interest, and that's a fantastic thing about playing the piano or just taking an interest in music. It would lead into all sorts of other spheres. My father would get me Oscar Peterson records or records by Frederick Gulder, the German pianist, or I'd start being interested in the stride pianists, and the whole world of the piano starts to open up. And the more you know, the more of a mystery it is, and the more it just goes on and on. And that's the fantastic thing about it. It's just constant. It is still a constant thing of delight and learning. Well, my tips for the budding pianist taking up the piano. The first thing is that you do have to have a piano in the house. I mean, I know that sounds obvious, but a lot of people say, well, I'm thinking about learning the piano. Should I get one? Well, you're never going to learn the piano unless you've got one. And then once there is a piano, you've got to remember a piano is a piece of furniture. It's a friend in the corner of the living room. It certainly was in our house when I was growing up. And when you lift up the lid, it's kind of magical. Even if it's sort of fascinating. The fact that it's loud and quiet, and you can sort of play chords. And not only that, you can look at the chords. It's laid out in front of you, unlike on a guitar or an instrument you blow in. There it is. Everything's sort of like you can understand it. So the first thing. Tip number 1, get a piano. Yeah. Tip number 2 is really, I think, you've got to love it. So only really try and play music that you love. Love what you play and play what you love. Otherwise, there's no point. If you're a professional musician, sometimes you have to play some things you like more than others. But if you're playing for pleasure, and if you're learning the piano, and you're first getting to grips with it, what's the point in playing anything you don't like? So try and find somebody who can teach you the things that you love. Otherwise, there's no point in learning them, is there? If there's no point in playing music you don't love, and you can't. And that's the thing that will inspire you more. So it's whatever the music you love, that's what you've got to follow. One of the things people quite often ask me is this: they say, they'll say, when I was young, I had piano lessons, and I sort of quite liked it, but I prefer going out, and I didn't really follow it. And now I'm older, it's too late. Well, that really isn't true. I think it's actually in many ways, easier to learn an instrument when you're older. And here's why. One is because your concentration span is much greater. To sit at a musical instrument for an hour and engage with it is actually a pleasure, and you can, because you're going into a different world for that hour. You're away from whatever your other world is. When you're a child, you're maybe being taken away from something you want to do. You maybe want to go out and play with the children out in the street or whatever you want to do, and you're being made to stay in. So I think the first thing is that it's from that point of view, and you can concentrate on an hour, for an hour much easier when you're older, and you can understand, I think, and take in things. I mean, all of us can work out how to work our mobile phones. Perhaps not all of us can, but many of us can, or work out computers. And if you can do that, the understanding music really is really easy. And also, perhaps you understand yourself, so you'll know whether you need to learn by learning by sight reading, or whether you need to learn by ear, and you'll understand yourself what you're better at because of the other things that you've achieved in your life. So I think it is, and I didn't take up the guitar really until maybe 10 or 15 years ago properly. I used to sort of fiddle around with it, but now I'm much better than I've ever been. And the other thing is that I would say as a word of encouragement is I feel, and I think any musician hopefully feels, professional musician feels, that they're improving all the time. It's not like you get older and you get worse. It gets to a point where physically or mentally you're then impaired, but really it's a constant improvement. It's not like you're a sportsman where you're depending on physical strength. It's a different thing. So I think the older you get and the more you understand yourself, the easier it is to learn, and the easier it is and the more enjoyable you can understand how to enjoy it. So that's what I would say to people. So I think it's much better. It's never too late to take it up. I think Yamaha are very far thinking, because I think the act of making music, I mean, it's an incredible thing, and I think that that Yamaha encouraging lots of people to learn to play is such a great idea, because it brings pleasure to the people around you. Well, unless it's maybe the drums and you're playing them very loud, or even, yes, but of course you can have the silent playing ones. But it brings pleasure to the people around you. It's a way of communicating with people without using necessarily these blunt instruments I'm using now, words. It's also a way of having a community thing. It's also by learning to play, you appreciate, when you hear somebody playing really well, you can appreciate it all the more through your own understanding of learning to play. So I think it's a really great thing that Yamaha are doing. And of course they make a range of different instruments, which are very high quality instruments, but I think I think they're very unique in realizing that it's not just about trying to sell people musical instruments, it's about opening up your whole mind to the idea of music and the pleasure it can bring. What I like to try and do is just keep sort of moving forward all the time. If you move backwards, that's all right too, but just keep moving forward. So the joy for me is learning more music. And going back to what I was saying earlier, I find it probably easier now to learn music than I did when I was 25. So the more you do it, the more you enjoy it. And for me, the more I play music, the more I play with my orchestra, the more I play with guests on my television show, the more I enjoy it. So I'm just looking forward to engaging and enjoying music much more this year.
Jools, thank you very much.
Pleasure.